It is my pleasure to introduce Gillian O'Brien, Community Education and Training Worker for WWILD, Victims of Crime Disability Training Program. Gillian has been with WILD for 3.5 years. Her presentation today will draw on her own experiences, along with that of the organisation, in working alongside people with intellectual disabilities who have been victimised or exploited, and the voices of women who have survived. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's, I have to admit I have never done a webinar before. This is my first on camera, but I hope you'll be patient with me. So as Lauren said, I work for WILD, Sexual Violence Prevention Association, in the Victims of Crime Disability Training Program. So just briefly, WILD is based in Brisbane, but we do Queensland-wide training and provide phone information, advice and referral statewide also. So very happy to take calls if anyone ever wants to ring in and talk over a situation or is looking for some information or non-legal advice about a client or about their situation. So I'm a social worker, and my role is part community education and training like today. But I also do a fair amount of direct outreach support for people with intellectual disability who have been victims of crime. So that's 14 years and older, and I do a bit of group work as well. So that's in the Greater Brisbane area. So WILD also has one other victims of crime worker in the same role as me, and 2 counsellors, Jill and Robin, who do specialised trauma counselling with our client group. Now, aiming to have about 40 minutes for talking and then 20 minutes for questions. I'll try and keep to time. We're lucky enough today that you won't have to watch me talk the whole time. We have 3 videos. Some wonderful women self-advocates have kindly agreed to share their stories with you. So they're sharing about what it's like to live with a disability and their experiences in trying to get help with domestic violence. So just briefly, we do define intellectual disability in all of our trainings just so we make sure we're on the same page. So the DSM-5 defines it as involving impairments of general mental abilities that impact adaptive functioning in 3 domains: the conceptual domain, which includes like language, reading, writing, maths, memory, all those kind of things. The social domain, referring to empathy, social judgment, communication skills, ability to make and retain friendships and relationships. And the practical domain, looking at self-management, personal care, money management, helping organising themselves, planning, all of those kind of things. So they've kind of de-emphasised IQ in the DSM-5. Generally, they talk about, you know, below normal functioning, under 70, in terms of IQ is determined as below normal, what's classed as normal. And you might hear terms around like mild and moderate and severe disability. But we work with people across all different levels of disability. Particularly the counsellors will do direct work with people who have a range of different kinds of disability. In my role, when there's someone who has a more severe disability, I might be, or higher support needs, I might more often be working with the other safe people in their lives, their family or workers or other supporters, and supporting them to support that person rather than doing a lot of direct work with the person themselves. So those terms are shortcuts, but they aren't always useful. So one person's language might be really good, and people might assume that they have a mild disability, but it's not necessarily an indicator of their conceptual understanding. And others might have a label of moderate or severe, but may have skills in other areas which allow them more independence than someone who has a mild label. I think mild can also be misleading in terms of their level of vulnerability. So people hear mild and think it must not affect them that much. and some people will, pass most of the time, but you might find that they're really suffering in the community on a lot of different levels. So I'll go through those domains a little bit later on, and some of those so areas of disadvantage. But first of all, I wanted to share with you one of our videos. So Cheryl is a pretty amazing woman, and one of those people who, when you met them, you might not necessarily realise that they had a disability straight away. Like even myself, it does take a while to see where that disability is, but I knew that she had some difficulty reading and writing, but she was kind enough to share her experience of living with domestic violence and what it's been like getting help, and what it's been like with her disability, how that impacts upon her. Now she's been a woman who's experienced a lot of trauma in her life and vulnerability to multiple violent relationships, but she obviously has an amazing resilience and spirit. So I'll share with you this video. We'll get it going. She wanted to be identified. She's happy for her name and her face to be shown. So she's a really brave woman. Here we go.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm just here to talk about domestic violence, what it can do to you. Well, from the age of 20, I've been through domestic violence for about 22 years. It damaged me. You sort of got to think, what are you going to do, where are you going to run, where are you going to hide every night, and it doesn't work like that. You've got to put it in front, like you and your kids got to be safe and not harmed, and you got to put your safety first before anybody else, and that's where I didn't put my kids' safety first, and I had to go through life without my children because of it.
Kinds of services?
I went to women's domestic violence on the phone, so I can get like to hide me and bring me back to Brisbane. And then I went through the court one of domestic violence.
And court support, was it?
Yeah, court support. Yeah, and then I went through some other company. And then I went through DV Connect. DV Connect, and I found they were the best because I've gone a long way.
WWILD.
Oh, WWILD.
So
sorry.
DV Connect told you about, put you onto us
at
WWILD.
Yeah, at WWILD, and I've gone a long way since then. Now I know, I don't have to live in domestic violence, and because I got married and I got bashed terribly, and then I had to go and charge him, but so it was hard, to be honest. I'm not going to sit here and lie. It was hard because I needed a divorce and some fines cleared up that they weren't mine. And I found these people were the most rudest people that day. They treated us like we were, how can I say it? That we'd just come out of the street into their office, right? But they didn't explain themselves properly. They sort of dragged, and like they were trying to push us out the office, like wouldn't give us proper answers, and they wanted to know where my husband is. I tried to tell them I didn't know that, and they were talking too fast for me to understand. So at the end I sort of got a little bit angry. And I sort of just lost it a little bit there, but I don't appreciate the way they treated me and the person. I used to throw them in the bin. I'd pile on my ad. I don't know what it says. So I was throwing the bin. Or somebody texts me a message like, oh yeah, just like, so it is hard for us. But you know what? I love who I am. I used to be ashamed of it, but hey, can't fix it. And it's not because I didn't go to school, or it's that I had a brain blockage, and my left side will work, but my right side won't communicate. So, Really, you know what I got to say on that one? You need to step back one, take a bit of time and think of the person that's going through it, because it's not easy to walk into a service and say, well, I can read when I know I can't. So, you know, they've got to realise we've got problems just as much as anybody else, you know, but we're the ones that are going to live with it, you know. So, you know, give us a bit of respect, you know, make time for us, you know, don't just push us aside and say, well, they're dummies, you know, because it isn't right.
What this whole story is.
When you're having meetings with them and they going too fast, sometimes you've got to say to them, look, slow up, explain, because we don't really understand where you're really coming from, where, you know, we're different to you, and you just got to take that bit of time to step back and say, hey, we'll sit and explain everything properly, bit by bit, you know, not this, like, yeah. Yeah, all I want to say, hey, give us a break, give us a chance, you know, we're just like you know, so hey, just get out there to people and say, hey, they got a problem, but we're there for you. So I hope you are all listening.
Okay, so yeah, pretty powerful for stuff from Cheryl. I'll kind of refer to her story as we go through, and draw out some things as we go through. She's pretty good at talking for herself, as you can see on a lot of things. But if we're looking at Cheryl has experienced a lot of these factors that we're looking at on the screen. So people who experience intellectual disability of some kind are overrepresented when we're looking at a range of issues around social disadvantage. So if we're talking about poverty, if you have an intellectual disability, you're almost certainly going to be poor. You can't get a job, you're living on the pension, you're living in poor housing. Physical and mental health issues are maybe a result of violence or a result of just the everyday experience of living with the anxiety of not understanding a lot of things that go on around you, and becoming victims of exploitation and abuse. And another layer in which impair people's ability to cope with stress. A lot of people we see have had their children removed, or grown up in foster care themselves, or both, having contact with the criminal justice system, alcohol and substance abuse. You can imagine for someone like Cheryl the impact that this would have had on her self-esteem and well-being throughout her entire life, and I think it's amazing to see her in such a good place right now and so confident. It's wonderful. So if we're looking at some of the statistics of vulnerability, I mean, it's really hard to put really clear numbers on it, because we know that people, there's underreporting, and we're talking about different cohorts. So we might, you know, some of these stats might be talking about people living in residential situations or people living in the community. It's, you know, they're just to give you a bit of an idea of the range that people, you know, and these are things that we see played out in the real life stories and experiences of people like Cheryl and the other women who are going to tell their stories today. So people with intellectual disability are 2.9 more times more likely to be assaulted, 10.7 more times more likely to be sexually assaulted, 12.7 more times likely to be victim of robbery, 4 to 10 more times more likely to be become victims of crime. And this last one, you know, kind of blows people away. That was looking at a range of about 7 studies, and about people with intellectual psychosocial impairment and their experiences around sexual assault. And so they estimated, looking at those 7 studies, it's probably somewhere between 50 and 99% of people who experience sexual assault in their lifetime. So people are also more likely to be victimised multiple times throughout their life, and also violence is more likely to be ongoing and severe, and we'll look at some of the reasons for that as we go through. So if we're talking about abuse generally, who might the abuser be? Who is people with intellectual disability vulnerable to? It could be anyone. It could be family members. You know, some people we see grow up and live their whole lives with abuse. We'd see people who have been living with their parents since they're well into their 40s, and the only reason that the abuse has stopped is because the parent has died. So there's something about the life projection and experience of people with intellectual disabilities, which means that they are more vulnerable to that ongoing abuse. They may not leave home like a lot of other people do in their early 20s or whatever. Intimate partners, so-called friends and acquaintances. More and more people are using social media, and the literacy is a barrier for lots of people. There are those with better literacy who then meet abusers through their sites. I won't bag them completely because some of they can be amazing for people in terms of connecting with communities and networks that aren't available to them in the real life community. But yeah, they can make people very, very vulnerable, because this group are more vulnerable to grooming than other adults. And very little research has been done in that area, but we know a lot about grooming when we talk about children, and sometimes we refer to grooming process when we're talking about generally about adults who have experienced domestic violence. But when we're talking about people with intellectual disability, there's different life situations kind of going on. People often do make their decisions for them. People around their family, their support workers, things like that. So it's a different situation in terms of grooming. So that's a really interesting area for anyone looking for a PhD topic. And if we're talking about sexual assault, in over 80% of cases, the offender is known to the person. There's just some stats. Now, looking at, I'm going to thank People with Disabilities Australia for this slide. If we look at higher risk individuals, factors like dependency on others and having few alternatives to exploitation. For example, Cheryl, her vulnerability is increased by dependency, even though she's, she gets on really well. Verbally, she's really good, and she's quite an independent person, but her lack of literacy and numeracy does make her really vulnerable. Like she said, she throws letters in the bin, and those are important ones. People might rely on people to help them get money out from the bank and use an ATM if you don't have numeracy. It can make people really vulnerable to exploitation. Other people might depend on others for physical support to even leave the house. It's often easy for abusers to take advantage of people because taking over their money, their decision making, because they tell them they can't do it themselves or they're stupid. And people are told this their whole lives. So it makes them really vulnerable. And outsiders might even accept this as normal because the person has a disability, that someone's coming in and doing things for them and taking over. So we need to be aware of that and cautious of that. People might rely on alternative forms of communication, so they might not be viewed as a credible reporter for that reason, because whether those forms of communication are seen as reliable ways of reporting. Things like timelines. Cheryl really struggles with timelines and with saying when something happened. And if we're, when she's trying to tell the story of her life and of domestic violence and trying to get help, when things don't kind of add up and times don't add up, then people start to, if they don't know her, they start to question it. And they start to not believe her, and it makes it really, really difficult for her to get help. So if we're hearing someone who their timelines aren't making sense, just consider what is the content of the story. We might need to look for alternative ways of verifying, dates and times of that information, if there are other records of that, because it may just be something that people struggle with. I'll talk about lacking critical information a bit later, and kind of mention learned helplessness, and we'll talk about compliance. You can imagine all of these things lead to quite low self-esteem in a lot of people. People are socially isolated very often. They might have, a lot of people don't lack supportive family relationships around them. They might only have paid care relationships in their lives. They're put down throughout their life. So that leads to a desire to please others quite often, and putting up with a lot of abuse in order to just have a friend or a relationship, because an abusive relationship is better than none. And it might make people more vulnerable to suggestibility as well. How much easier is it for a perpetrator's job to socially isolate their victim when the person is more vulnerable to suggestion and to grooming? I'm going to suggest to you, don't see your family anymore. They don't understand you like I do. So if someone, like a lot of people, or some people with intellectual disability, are already vulnerable to suggestibility, then that's going to make that perpetrator's job even easier. Some people might have an underdeveloped sense of personal space. So there was one lady we came across who, a support worker told us that she was meeting this client for the first time, coming to help her shower. This lady hadn't even talked to her, had never met her before, but just stripped off all her clothes and held her arms out and just stood there like that. And you can imagine how vulnerable that makes somebody. So yeah, it's quite incredible. One of the other factors that can make people vulnerable is that they might engage in, problematic behaviours. Cheryl mentioned getting a bit aggro at the lawyers. I can say as a witness that, it was in response to the lawyer's approach, that she wasn't understanding, she wasn't getting it, so she was getting frustrated, and the attitude was quite poor as well. It was quite accusing and quite rude. But if she's then responding to that, getting aggro, she's seen negatively and is more likely to be told to leave and not receive the help that she needs. And that can be extended as well to someone in another situation who's like living in a group home, for example, with paid support. If they're showing challenging behaviours and are viewed negatively by others, they're less likely to be believed and helped when they're disclosing abuse. And finally, exposure to multiple care settings and multiple service providers is going to often make someone vulnerable, because there might be staff changeovers a lot, and people aren't kind of keeping track of that person's safety and picking up on things. These are some attitudes that are quite common in our society that increase people's vulnerability to abuse and reduce their ability to leave abusive situations. Now, when I do training in face-to-face situations, then I ask people like who's seen or been aware of these attitudes through their work, and most people have come across some of these ideas at some point. So the result of these, they disempower, they devalue someone's experience, they contribute to their vulnerability, or they result in people denying or dismissing their experience of abuse. So we need to be aware of these, and because they manifest in discriminatory practices, and they limit people's ability to access help, they deny their rights and obstruct their access to justice. And these attitudes are often also employed by offenders to justify their inappropriate actions and prevent the victim from breaking the abusive relationship. So they can justify it by saying, and people around them can will deny it by saying that the person's sexually promiscuous, or people with intellectual disability they seek out sexual contact, they're sexually promiscuous, so it probably wasn't sexual assault. So it's just, I think it's important to be aware. Some of these will result that other people will make the decision about whether they should report or not. Supporters for that person, if they can't do it by themselves, then other people may be making that decision. They may control whether they access counselling or not. So if they say that they can't, they think that they can't fully comprehend what is happening, then they suffer less emotional trauma, so they may not need counselling, or it's not as important to report or to prosecute. So unable to distinguish fantasy from fact, and being prone to fantasize. I think some people with intellectual disability will engage in storytelling. That's one of the features for some people. I think it's important to focus on, when there's an allegation, focus on the allegation and not the packaging. Not the things around it. Look at what the content is. So if someone's saying aliens are stealing my money, the important part of that is someone's money actually disappearing? It's important to be aware of that. And I think it's when these kind of attitudes get applied to all people with an intellectual disability, that's when there's real disadvantage and discrimination that takes place. So yeah, I just wanted to share some of those with you. And so you're probably a bit bored of me watching me talk at the moment, so I'll share another video with you. This lady didn't want to use her real name, and so we've made efforts. We've used a pseudonym, and we've disguised her appearance, but she's been kind enough to share her story of escaping from domestic violence and going through the court system. So I'll put that on.
Good morning, people, and thank you for listening to my story. My name is Jenny, and this was a scary time for me. I used to hear noises in my house. I had to go to the hospital a few times. This scared me, and I felt like I was going to die. The hardest thing was that I kept on going back to him. I think I did this because I was lonely. I wanted someone around. My parents were not supportive. They said it was my fault for going back to him all the time. I had some support from the DV service. They helped me to get my locks changed. They also came over to my house and checked if my house was safe. This made me feel a lot safer. I was also scared. I was scared about going to court to get the DVO. I was worried about the judge, or what the judge would say. I was also glad to have the support of Jane at court. She helped me fill out the application for the DVO and legal aid. I was also glad she was there to comfort me if I got upset about some things. If I got stuck on something, she would talk to the lawyer and explain it, and then explain it to me. I thought that the lawyer was good, though he sometimes said things I didn't understand. I was really glad when I got a 6 months DVO. This made me feel a lot better. I am grateful that I'm having counselling with Robin. It is really good to get things off my chest, and she helped me to stay positive and don't think about bad thoughts, just that you're going to be safe. She helped me get through. She helped me feel I could say no to things I didn't want to do. I was very grateful to get money from Victims of Assist Queensland. I was able to get the money back for the lock that was changed, and I was also able to replace my clothes which were damaged. This money has helped me and my family. I think people need some help. And my advice to people, if you are slow, it is okay. If you don't understand reading and writing, just say so and someone will explain it. It is important to trust your gut instinct and take action if you need to. Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story. I have been able to tell Quinton Price when she came to WWILD, and Heather for the research, and Nancy for the ABC radio station. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye for now.
Okay. Now I think Jenny's story is probably familiar to a lot of people who work with victims of domestic violence. There are a lot of similarities with other victims, but I think the important thing is around supporting people around communication and the level of support we need. So I'm not going very well for time, but I'll try and get through this. Okay, so when we're trying to reduce someone's vulnerability and help them recover, we need to start with rapport building. It's really it's essential. We need to get to know the person with their situation. You know, build that trust. So we can, if you're in a counselling situation, that may be a really long stage of the counselling process. In my role, if I'm meeting with someone, it needs to kind of happen while we're working to achieve practical outcomes. So we need the person to know that we're going to take the time to listen to their story, and we're going to provide them with practical options and help them implement their decisions. So we need to build that trust so that we can overcome some of those communication barriers and make sure that they're really comfortable to make their own choices and speak up and let you know when they don't understand something or when they need extra help with something. People may need information about basic legal rights. Like, we can't assume a lot. We can't assume much at all. So one of the things I always tell people when I'm talking to them about their options about reporting is just to make sure that, you know, if we go and do this, you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to end up and going to jail, because that's a surprisingly common misconception, that if I report to police and if they don't believe me, then they'll put me in jail. And yeah, it's pretty incredible when people have that fear, because that's what they see police as doing. Police are there to put people in jail. I'll talk a bit more about some of these other things as we go along. So information needs to be delivered in an accessible way. Like, Cheryl was really articulate about how the lawyers spoke too fast and didn't take the time to explain step by step. And Jenny mentioned that as well, that she needed help to understand what was going on around her in the legal system. So it's really important to be aware of our language. I'll go through that a little bit more in a sec. One of the other things about communication is masking. So we call masking is when people pretend that they don't have a disability, or pretend that they do understand when they don't. And you can imagine how Cheryl and Jenny would, pass most of the time. Sorry, I've just realised I can't see my screen. Yep. And because it takes time to get to know someone and recognise when they don't understand something, or for them to feel comfortable to tell you when they don't. And Jenny has become great at this. She now expects like high fives when she asks you to explain something that you've said. It's awesome. It's really funny. And I could tell with Cheryl, she was just sitting in the lawyers' meeting and giving me confused looks. So that was good that she's able to give me that clear signal. Another aspect of communication is compliance. Now, if you've ever been in a meeting with someone and they're just sitting there like nodding and then agreeing, and that's either one of three things happening. You could be nailing it, and you have you're reading their mind. You know what they're wanting. You're asking all the right questions. The other thing is they might not want you to know that they don't understand. They might be masking, or they might be agreeing with the more powerful person in the room. So sometimes people will just comply, will agree, because they trust in you that you know the answers. So I want to make you happy, so we'll just agree with you. So we need to build that rapport, get to know when the person is just yesing, and help them feel comfortable to say no or I don't know. And we have to be aware of suggestibility. I mentioned that earlier. What colour shirt was the offender wearing? Was it red? Yeah, it was. Yeah, and that becomes part of the story. So that may be an issue as well. So I'll talk about abstract thought. This is something that's really important that people often don't realise is an issue. So many people with an ID struggle with abstraction and require help to concretise abstract concepts. So those include anything that we can't see or touch. So feelings, rights, responsibilities, consequences, time, goals, all of those things are abstract concepts. Concrete thinking is about when we understand things that we can see, that we can touch, that we can feel, all of those practical things. So if we look at an example, a concrete thinker will look at the Statue of Liberty and see a woman standing there holding a torch. But an abstract thinker, if they have the right cultural background, will see a symbol of freedom. So you can see the difference between an abstract thinker and a concrete thinker. Developmental theory says most of us develop that ability by about 12 to 14 years old, but for people with intellectual disability, that doesn't necessarily happen. Even with people with quite high capacity like Cheryl and Jenny, there's going to be a lot of abstract concepts that they won't get and that need to be explained. One of the ways to do that one of our counsellors suggests is, she thinks about it as people have a whiteboard in their mind, and we need to be able to build the abstract concept by using lots of examples up on their whiteboard. So thinking about ways that we can, I think it comes down to explaining things really clearly and trying to be really careful about our language in a really short explanation of that. Repolymerization of reactive intermediates may depend on the rate of production of radicals, and hence I'm not going to even read all of that, but I can only understand a few words of that. This is often how we sound to someone who has an intellectual disability. They're trying to pick out what words they understand and then try and figure out the context and try and fill in the gaps and work out what the heck we're talking about. So it's something to, if we look at that, then we get a little bit of a sense of what that means. If we look at it in another context that might be more relevant, we may be able to charge the offenders with grievous bodily harm, but if you choose to pursue the complaint, that you will need to provide sufficient identifying information in order for us to complete our investigation and have a reasonable prospect of conviction. And that might sound like something that a police officer might say to someone trying to report a crime. So our job is, one, not to talk like this, of course, and two, to help translate when other people do. We like to say that it's not the client's job to try to understand us, it's our job to make ourselves understandable to the client. So we just need to be very, very aware of our language and try and just monitor when we're using words that we think the person might not understand, and take the time to check understanding, reframe it and explain it. These are just some tips for communication when you're working with someone in interviews. You might need more time and more sessions than usual, minimising distractions obviously. We've talked about building rapport and trust. You might need to allow more time than usual for the person to respond. So when you ask them a question, they're taking the information in, they're analysing what it is you've said, and then they're trying to formulate their response, recall their memory, formulate their response. So it does take a bit more time. So just be aware we're not banging out the questions like the lawyer was the other day. Try not to use jargon or complex language, though of course we need to be really careful, be really respectful that we're talking to the person as an adult, but just being aware of our language, using plain English. Use their own words and meanings as much as possible. Are we at 40 minutes or are we at 35? Oh, I can't even hear you. Signposting changes of topic, so rather than say we're going to change to this topic now, and checking up for understanding in different ways, like asking the question in different ways, or taking some responsibility by saying, look, I'm not sure if I explained that right. Can you tell me in your words what you got from that, so I can do a good job in making sure I've explained that correctly. I'm sorry, I've got how are we going with?
You've got about 15 minutes left just for question time now. So
just for questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
yeah, sorry about that, everybody. I'm very passionate about this subject, as you can see, and it's so hard to, I cut out a lot of stuff, but it's so hard to figure out what you can and can't, what to include and what not to include. But I guess, yeah, just very briefly, I think people just need a lot more support around referrals, around connecting them with services. We know people in domestic violence need a lot of referrals, and we might need to really work to make that happen. Otherwise, you might not see it happen. Now, a lot of people, I'll just show you our resource kit. So I just wanted to refer you to our How to Hear Me resource kit, which is available free online, or you can order it through our website. It's aimed at counsellors, but it's also a lot of valuable information for other professionals working with people with intellectual disabilities. So I encourage you to have a look, check that out. Our website also has a lot of good resources on it. So I put it in the first slide, but it's www.wild.org.au, WILD with 2 W's. So I'm sorry of such a short time period, but we do training, so please get in touch if you'd like the full, I can send out the full PowerPoint slides, or yeah, anything else we can talk about doing training for your organisation. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions? You can type them in the question pane or raise your hand and I will unmute you so you can ask directly. I've had a few requests for handouts and slides already, Gillian.
Mm-hmm.
I had a bit of a question around, as you said, that a lot of people mask their disability, and so what are some good ways to good questions and good approaches to trying to sort of get an idea of that for a counsellor or someone working with a person? Yeah.
So if you're trying to assess, if you suspect there might be a disability and you're trying to assess that,
yeah.
So some of the questions you might ask might be like, can you tell me about where you went to school? They might have gone to a special school, or did you get a bit of extra help at school? Do you have someone extra helping you? Do you get money from Centrelink? Are you on a pension? Can you tell me what that's for? Is there anyone who helps you with like talking over making decisions, or anyone who helps you with your money? So kind of just getting to know the person and finding a bit more about their life will give you a bit of a picture, start to give you a bit of a picture about their life. Yeah, I mean, sometimes once you get that sense, then you can say, oh, just wondering, I work with a lot of people with, who have a disability and need a bit of extra help. Is that something that you experience? And sometimes people will, once they feel a bit more comfortable, willing to share that. Some people don't identify as having a disability at all, but sometimes they will. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, a few options.
So I have another question. What are some of the ways you support people who continue to be in violent relationships and are not ready to leave for the various reasons of vulnerability you suggested?
I think change in domestic violence is almost always a long-term process. I think on average it takes anyone living in domestic violence about 8 attempts to leave a relationship. So it can be a really long process, and it wears down. It wears down on family. It wears down on workers. It's difficult for us to see and to cope with that. But I think hanging in there and being a trusted person for that person, and just like taking the time to be a supportive person for them and help them start to see there might be alternatives and start to rebuild their self-esteem, and linking them in with other kinds of support. So we have a women's group that meets here, and so some of those social relationships, if we can link them in with other kinds of supports, then slowly they might be able to see other life alternatives, and that might be that they don't deserve to be living in the situation that they're living in. But I think it can be a really slow process and very difficult.
Okay, someone asked, is there a WWILD outreach office to the Gold Coast?
Unfortunately, yeah, we don't really provide counselling and victims of crime support on the Gold Coast. But with our referral service, we often refer down there to some of the generalist services, the sexual assault service or the domestic violence service. There's also Gold Coast Advocacy, so they do a similar kind of job to my role. So that's we can refer people wherever you are in the state, and we'll try and find out about who the local service is that might be able to assist.
Okay.
If one exists, which we hope there is.
Someone has asked if you could discuss signposting.
Signposting, changing some topics. So if sometimes when we're having a discussion with someone just generally, we'll change topics quite suddenly, and that can be very confusing when you have an intellectual disability going from one topic to another. So we might need to be really clear about that and say, oh look, just why don't we leave that aside for a minute and we'll talk about this topic. Is that okay? And just give them a moment to, okay, we're going to switch over. Or sometimes if I feel like I've asked a question completely the wrong way, they're really confused, say, oh, I'm sorry, can I just start again? I'll just start from that question again because I think I asked that really badly. So that's what we call signposting, just to make that a bit clearer and give them a moment to, okay, it's not automatic. I understand where you're going with this.
Did that answer, are you happy with that, Mari, who asked the question? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. I work with people with disabilities, excuse me, and I find that sometimes the carers or guardians always want to meet as a group. I've also found that at times I have identified some concerns regarding abuse about the ability to find further facts without the carers there is really hard. Do you have a strategy that may help for my talk to the person independently?
Yeah, it can be really difficult when the carer might be the guardian and the abuser might be the guardian, and they might be making those decisions. One of the ways we might do that sometimes is providing other safe spaces. So things that aren't seen as threatening or seen as meetings. I mentioned the women's group before, for example. So if we're going to do the women's group, we're going there to do cooking or doing craft, or we're not there to have a serious meeting. But sometimes when people have that space, or it might be in the car afterwards or beforehand, they might have that space to something might come up that they wouldn't otherwise share. Otherwise, I guess it depends on the situation and how far you can push it. If say, I think it's really important that we I have a meeting together, or might need to refer to counselling, and that's really private, or something like that. But it's kind of probably unique to the situation. In your strategies have to think of some alternatives and be a bit creative sometimes. Probably not answered your question really well, but please call if you'd like to discuss further later on the individual situation.
It's probably about trying, one thing and then seeing how that goes and adjusting.
It works. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you don't want to alienate families as well and then have them shut. That does happen as well, like they have them shut off from the service completely, and then that person is completely out of your reach, and you're really concerned for them. So it takes a bit of sensitivity and a bit of wheeling and dealing, and just pushing these gently and see what you can make happen.
That sort of thing is pretty based on the individual and the relationship you have with them, isn't it? So, you know, there might be different opportunities for different people.
Yeah, that's right.
Another one is, what are the employment opportunities for more support workers with WWILD?
Oh, with WWILD. We're a really small organisation, so we only have 6 staff and 2 or 3 of them are part-time. So not a lot of opportunity for employment, I'm afraid. But yeah, occasionally we do project work, but yeah, it's not. It's a really stable staff group, and yeah, a really small organisation. So we'd love to have a chat if you're, you know, in another area, want to keep in touch or keep aware of what we're doing or things. Please, you know, check in, but not a lot of employment opportunities, I'm afraid.
We've had a request for the mail address for the kit. Yep, so if you could. Yep.
Yeah, so the web address,
I think that's what I mean. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yep.
So yeah, the kit is available online. I would just recommend, it's on the QCOS Community Door website. I would just recommend Googling how to hear me and QCOS or Community Door, and then you can either view it online, you can download it. There are actually videos that are available that you can that demonstrate some of the counselling techniques that they talk about in the booklet. So just a support for the booklet. But otherwise, you can order a hard copy if you like to hold something through our website. So I'll just I think I had it up here. So wild.org.au, down the side here in the grey box, that's where we list our upcoming events that we have, which don't really have others that you can sign up for at the moment, but we have some of our resources there. So it says Order How to Hear Me resource kit down there, and you go through and register to purchase it. I think it's $30 for the booklet and the DVD. I also just wanted to point out we have a resources and research section. So we have a lot of articles and a lot of other resources, reports, things like that on different areas relating to intellectual disability. So please feel free to go along there and have a look. It can be a little bit hard to find, so I went straight to that page. We've got a search box though, so you can put resources in there and help you get to this page. So yeah, let's have a look.
Great. One more question. Can your service provide support to clients in regional areas?
We can't provide direct support to clients in direct regional areas. The services that we have available for regional areas is our phone information advice referral service. So happy to talk over any situations, help but try and locate what other services in the area might be able to assist, provide information about reporting or those kind of things. We also, our counsellors provide support to other counsellors who are working with people with intellectual disability. So in your area, if there's a a counsellor who's working with someone, they need some, feeling a bit stuck, need some strategies. One, send them to How to Hear Me, and 2, they can ring up and make a time to talk with one of the counsellors. So yeah, that's available as well. And community education and training is available. We've been to Cairns this year already, and we're hoping to go to Mackay and Townsville later in the year. So if you're in that area, you can, on our website, you can either email me, or on our website we have a mailing list function. So you can ask to be, we have a local mailing list and a regional mailing list. So if you want to be made aware of new resources that come up, or of trainings in regional areas, then you can get on our mailing list and we'll let you know when those are coming up.
Great. Well, I think that's actually all we have time for, and that's the last of the questions that are in there. So thank you very much, Gillian. It's been really interesting.